Let's look at an application of a two-dimensional array. And I'm going to start by showing you the output. So here is what I'm calling a seat map. And this program is going to allow us to buy a seat or to return a seat. And I have laid this out for an airplane seat. So the output looks like this. So here's our seat map. And I have the seats listed across here. And of course, if you're on an airplane, that's A, B, C, D, E, F would be the seats, but we'll use numbers. Then on the left-hand side, I've got each row. So each row is designated here. So we have row 1, row 2, and this goes up to row 25, which is typical of an airplane that has seating like this. And I have initialized these seats with X's and O's. So if the seat has an X, that means that it's occupied. And if it has an O, that means that it's available. So our job is to write a program that will allow us to buy a ticket. And if we say we want to buy a ticket, then we hit yes. And we are to enter the row and the seat number. Well, this is not going to be a real rigorous program. So we're not going to actually go check to make sure that there's a seat available there. We're going to try to keep it simple. So we're looking for seats that have an O, which means that they're open. So in row 2, I see that seats 1, 2, and 3 are all open. So I'm just going to enter in the row number 2 and seat number 1, and I'll hit enter. And then we have a response. You just purchased a seat 1 in row 2. Do you want to buy another ticket? Well, okay, let's suppose I've got a companion, so I'll say yes, I want to buy another one. And I want the seat to be the one that's next to the one I just bought. So if you look up here, here's row 2, seat 1. So now that's marked with an X. So that's because I just purchased that seat. So let's also get a ticket in row 2 and seat number 2. Okay, so I hit enter. Okay, I've just purchased a seat in row number 2. So if I'm finished with that, then I'll just hit an N, enter, and then you can see that those two seats, row 2, seats 1 and 2, those are now marked with an X, which means that we just purchased them. We can also refund a ticket. We can return it for a refund. So let's suppose I've decided that I can't make the trip, then I can get a refund. So yes, I want to return the ticket. So I can hit Y, and then I can just go to row 2, seat number 2, hit enter, and I have returned it. So now you can see that that's now marked as open again. So that's how this is going to work. Do you want to return another ticket? I'll just say yes. And we'll go to row 2, seat number 1, enter. And now those two seats are now back open again. So that's what this program is going to do. And do you want to return another ticket? No, I do not. Then I will print the final seat map, and then the program will terminate. So we want to write a program to do this, and this is going to use a two-dimensional array. So you can see what the two-dimensional array is going to be. It's going to be an array that has 25 rows and it has 6 columns, and each one is going to be a character. So the type of this two-dimensional array is going to be a character array. We could have chosen to use integers and represented the seats with 1s and 0s or other numbers, so that would be fine as well. But I want to use the X's and the O's in here. All right, so that's the way the program is going to work. Now let's go write the code in order to make this program. Well, let's begin with what we have here, a partial program. And what we're going to do with this is we'll be able to print a diagram of the seats, and we'll be able to determine how many seats there are available. We will allow the user to pick a seat, and we will be able to mark a seat as available if it has been returned or if we've given a refund. So to begin with, we have some declarations. So I've declared seats as 6 and rows as 25, and I have a character array here. So you can see the two-dimensional array. It's called section, and it's going to be 25 rows, and if we look over here, that's 6 seats. So I've specified an array that's 25 by 6, and I've initialized everything to 0, but we're going to change that quickly because we're going to initialize it with values of X and O. There's some other things here that I'm using as indices to use in loops and so on. And I'm going to allow multiple runs of the program without terminating. So I'm going to have a do-while loop so that we can continue the program without having to stop it and start it each time. And that means we can allocate and sell. We can sell seats and we can refund seats as many times as we want to while the program's running. You can see the comments here. We want to initialize the seats with random values of X and O. So how do you do that? Then we want to print out a map of the seats, and we'll need a function to do that. We want to count how many seats there are available, and that's the same as counting how many O's we have. And then we want to sell a seat to a customer. So we'll need to write some functions to do that. Okay, well, let's get started with this, and we'll look at the other code as we move down toward that part of the program. So at the end, you see we don't have anything here for the functions just yet. So we'll need to put the functions down here. And let's start by writing a function that will initialize this two-dimensional character array to x's and zeros. So we're at the bottom of the program. Let's paste in the beginnings of a function. So this is going to be the function to initialize the array with x's and o's. Okay, so we have the array, and it's a type character, and it's a two-dimensional array, so I should have another set of brackets there. And it's going to need to know how many seats we have. Okay, so let's look at the type. It'll be a type void because we know already that if you have an array, then the information is passed out through the function by the parameter, so it's called by reference every time we use an array. So I'm going to call the function int seats, that's to initialize the seats, and I'm going to pass in a character array. So in the function, I'm just going to call it array. It's going to be a type character, and the first set of brackets, those are empty, the same way we've been doing with a single-dimensioned array. But we know now that we have to specify a number for that second set of square brackets. So in this case, it's going to be, how many seats do we have? How many columns? And that really is, how many seats per row are we going to have? So I have to specify that. So instead of using an integer for the rows and columns, then I'm just going to use seats here because that's always going to be the same. And I'm just not going to have to use an extra parameter for that over here. Now, you could, if you wanted to, you could just set this to the number 6, as we've done. And it has to be 6 in this case. And then if we wanted to pass in the number of rows, then we could pass that in as well, rows and columns. But in that case, it can never be more than 6 anyway. So this is a sufficient way to declare the header or the first line for the function. Now, the function just needs to initialize the array. And we've seen how to initialize array with random numbers before. So let's now look at the body of the function to see how we can initialize the array with x's and o's. So let's paste in the code to do that. And now let's go through it line by line. I have two for loops, so I need a loop control variable for each, which I'm going to call I and j. And the outside for loop is going to go through the number of rows that we have. And the inside for loop is going to go across each row for the number of seats that we have. So the outside loop will go for 25. In this example, we have 25 rows. And the inside loop is going to go across the row, doing column by column, and we have 6 seats for that. Now, how do we get O's and X's using a random number generator? Well, here's how we do it. We're going to generate a random number, and we're going to use a modulus 2. So when you use a modulus 2, it's always going to give us a 0, or it's going to give us a 1. So everything is evenly divided by 2, or if it's an odd number, it's going to have a remainder of 1. So we always get zeros and ones. So if this is true, if we have a random number that's, say, 28, then 28 modulus 2 is 0, then I am going to initialize that row and that seat to this character O. And if it's anything else, which would be a 1, then I'm going to initialize that seat to an X. So here's the trick. You just need to use random number modulus 2 in order to generate ones and zeros, and then we will store a letter O if it's a 0 and a letter X if it's a 1. So we go through that doubly nested loop, then that will initialize the array. And since it's a void function, we just use return semicolon here. Now we need to make our prototype, so we'll copy the first line and we'll paste it at the top, and that'll be our prototype, and we'll add a semicolon for that. Then we need to call the function. So we just put the call in here, and we can't see it yet because we have to write the function to write out the map of the seats, but we do have to call the function, so we can go ahead and include that here. So let's paste in the call, and we will call the function int underscore seats, and we'll send in the array section. That's the array right here, the two-dimensional array. And remember, you don't use the square brackets when you're calling a function with an array, no matter how many dimensions it has. The number of rows is what we're passing in, and we have 25 of those, so that's 25 up here. So we will pass that number in using this pound define constant rows. So that will be the same as calling it with the array section and 25. Okay, now in order to see what the seat map looks like, we need to write the function that will generate the seat map. So now we need to go do that function. So we paste the functions here. So at the bottom of the program now we're going to do the seat map. So this is a function seat map, and it's going to have the input array, and again we have 2 dimensions, so I need to put the 2 brackets there. So it's a character array, and it will contain X's and O's, and we're going to pass in the rows and the seats for this one. Okay, we're not going to use that as a parameter, so let's take that out. Okay, so we're just going to have one formal parameter for this function, and it's going to be the array seats. When we call it, we will send in the array called section. So we're going to use the rows, which was defined as 25, and we're going to use the seats, which is defined as 6. So inside this print seats or seat map program, we are going to use rows and we're going to use seats to determine how many times we want to pass through the inner and outer loops. Okay, now let's paste in some of the code and look at how we can generate the seat map. So we'll paste in the code, and this isn't the whole thing, this is just the first part of it. So remember when we looked at the output, we printed out the seat map and we had the seats printed across the top, just the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So that's what this loop does. First of all, we'll just print out at the top seat map in uppercase letters. Then I'm going to print the word seat. Notice there's no end line over here, just the word seat. And then I want to print 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I can do that like this. For j equals 0, j less than the seats, which is 6, j plus plus, then I'm going to just print out the value j plus 1. So let's see what we get here. All right, so don't worry about this just yet. J is not 3. Okay, j starts out as 0. So for j equals 0, I'm going to print out the value of j plus 1. So that prints the number 1, and I've got a set width of 2 in front of that. When j goes to 1, j is not 3, so I print out j plus 1, which is 2. So I printed out 1 and 2. Then when j goes to 2, then this is not true, so I print out 2 plus 1 is 3. So I've printed out 1, 2, and 3. The reason that I have this if statement here is I wanted to represent the aisle of the airplane. So since we're doing a seating arrangement in an aircraft, I wanted to insert this whenever j is equal to 3 before I print out the next number. So that's what this does. So I print out 1 space, 2 space, 3, and then I print out an extra space, 2 spaces here for the aisle. And then when j is 4, 5, and 6, I don't print this out. I print out 4, 5, and 6 for the seats, the seat number. So that just prints that first row at the top of our seat map. Okay, now let's move down and let's look at how we can print out all of the rows with the seats in each row. Well, let's paste in the loops to do that. So after I print out this first row up there, which is just designating the numbers 1 through 6, then I'm going to skip a line, and then we get into this nested for loop here. All right, so let's look at how this works. So I is going to go from 0 up to the total number of rows. Okay, so the outside for loop is going to go over all of the rows that we have. So I want to print out the row number first. So I'll print out cout row, and there's no end line here. Then I am going to print out the row number. So I'll use a set width of 2 again. And whenever I is 0, this is 1. And as I increments up to the number of rows, actually 1 less than the number of rows, then I'll print out the number. So this part of it just prints out row 1, row 2, row 3, all the way up to row 25. Now, we want to print out the X's and the O's that are actually stored in the array. So that's what this is going to do, and this is going to take care of each seat as we go across. All right, so this inside loop then is just for each individual row. So we'll start each time j is 0, and I'll do the same thing that I did up here. But this time, instead of printing out the numbers, I want to print out the elements of the array. So seats has been initialized with X's and O's. So as I go through the inner loop, j is going to be the row number, the seat number as we go across, and I is going to be the row number. So I is 0 for the first row, and j goes 0 up to 5. But when I printed those out up here, I printed out j plus 1, and I print out I plus 1, so we don't actually see that 0 index. Anyway, the inside loop then is going to go across each row, and it prints out X's and O's depending upon what's stored in the value j for that row. Then, after we've done each row, we come back up and we increment I to go to the next row. All right, so I'm using rows and columns here, kind of weird, but that just goes across each row, and the outside loop goes down every row. So I think you've seen the doubly nested for loop before. And by doing some special testing here, I can include some space for the aisle that's in the middle of the airplane. So that then will produce the nice seat map that I printed out at the beginning of the video. So this is the function that will print out a seat map for us. Great. Okay, now let's copy the first line and make a prototype. So copy, scroll up, paste, and add a semicolon. There it is. Then we can call seat map, and we can print out that section here. So let's add the call, and we'll run the program and see what we get. So let's put the call here. And it's pretty easy. The function only needs one variable, and that's the two-dimensional character array that we pass into it, and that section. So let's now compile and run the program. So now we have the output. Let's bring it over. And this is the initial seat map. So our random number generator produced the X and the O's that you see in the diagram here. Okay, so that first loop, that first for loop, let's go down and look at the code. Let's go take a look at that function again. So the top part of the function for seat map, okay, this part right here, that generates that first row, which prints out seat 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's what this little for loop at the top does. Okay, then we move down and we print out the row, and we print out the status of every seat on that row by printing the X's and the zeros. So you can see we have the row, and then we have the number here, and then we have the elements of the two-dimensional array here. So that's coming from here. So we print out row, we print out the row number, and then we print out the X and the O, X or the O that's stored inside the array. So that's how we get the rest of our seat map. So you can see this is how we start out, and we should have about an equal number of X's and O's from our random number generator. And there you go. That's the seating chart to begin with. Then we are ready to purchase a ticket, but we haven't written the code to do that yet. So now let's go add the code that lets us buy a ticket. As we scroll back to the top of the program, we'll see that we have another function that we need to write first, and that's to count up how many seats we have available. So if we don't have any seats available, we can't sell any. So we need to know that there really are some seats available. So let's go write the function to do that before we actually do the selling of the seats. So we move down and we'll paste in our function here. So this is going to count the number of seats. So we just have the input array again, and we need to have the rows and seats that's declared globally at the very top. We're going to use that here in the same way we did with the seat map function. So we're just going to accept as one input parameter the array section that's declared in the main program. All right, so then let's add the code so that we can count up how many seats are available to be sold. So we can paste the code in here to do that, and it's just a simple doubly nested loop, and we're just counting letter O's. Okay, so the outside loop goes over the number of rows, the inside loop goes across each row for the number of seats that we have, and then we just have our little if statement. So if that seat on that row is a 0, we just count the seat, and then the function is going to return that once we've gone through and finished those two nested loops. And because we do return something this time, the function has to be a type unsigned integer. So this function is going to tell us how many O's we have, which is how many available seats. So let's make a copy of the first line and go up and turn that into a prototype. So that goes up here. Add a semicolon, and we're good to go with that. Now we can just call the count seats program, and it will tell us if we have seats to sell. So we'll paste that in here. And now the count seats function will return some number, and we will save it in our seats available function, which was declared up there. Now we're ready to go and buy a ticket. All right, so let's put this in here. So we need to add some code in order to do that. All right, so now we got the question. Do you want to buy a ticket, yes or no? And this time I am going to use getLine to read the answer. In previous videos, I've just used a character instead of a string, and we just read in with cn. We've used cn to read in the answer. But I just wanted to show you, you can also do that with a getLine, but when you use getLine, then the answer has to be a string instead of a character. Okay, so a string instead of a character here, then you can use getLine here. So just a different way that you can do it. Now, we need to test to see if there are any seats, and if there are, then we can continue. So look at what's going on here. We are going to print out that there are that many seats available, so we will print that back out, and then we'll print out select your seat. Then we need to put code here so that we can select the seat, and then once we're done with that, we have the question, do you want to buy another ticket, yes or no? And we have another getLine to read the answer. So we can continue to buy tickets inside this loop as long as we want to. All right, so now let's go ahead and add the code to make that work. Well, the first thing we need to do is we need to check to see if we have any seats available. So let's just put in our if statement here. So we have called the count seats function, and if it returns 0, then we need to tell the customer that there are no more seats available. So we'll print out the message, sorry, this flight is full, and then we'll just return normally. It's not really an error message, it's just saying that this flight is full, you might as well give up. All right, now, if that's not the case, then we want to allow our customer to select which seat that they want. So let's add the code here to make that work. So let's paste that in. Now, for the customer to pick out a seat, we need to show them the seat map. So let's call the function seat map, and that will print that to the screen. Then we will ask the customer to pick out the row and the seat that they want. So then this cn statement will read that. Then we need to go mark that seat as an X if it is available. So let's add the code for that. So let's put the code here. We'll paste that in. And now let's examine the code. All right, now the input for row and seat is going to be a number that's 1 or above. Okay, we don't really want our customers to be typing in seat 0 and row 0, because normally you just don't think that way. So we'll let our customer pick out rows starting with 1, seats starting with 1, and we'll adjust for that with our index by subtracting 1 here. So if they want row number 1, then that's really index 0. Okay, so that will give us 0 here. Same thing here. If they want seat number 1 in a row, then that's really index 0 for the array. So we'll subtract 1 to get that. So if the customer picks row and seat, then we need to test to see, is there a 0 there? And if it is, then we can sell the seat. So if that's true, then we will just set that particular row with that particular seat. We'll put an X in there, so that marks it as sold. And we just sold a seat, so we need to subtract 1 from the seats available, and then we'll print out, you just purchased this seat in this row. Thank you for your order. Now, if it turns out that this seat is an X, that means it's been taken, then we'll print out, sorry, that seat's taken, please select a different seat. All right, so that's how we sell a ticket. We just mark the seat and row with an X if it's a 0 to begin with. Then we can loop through again and we can ask, well, okay, do you want to buy another ticket or not? And we can continue to buy as many tickets as we want. So that's what this loop is going to do. It lets us sell tickets, and we can mark each seat with an X as long as our seats are there, as long as we have seats, and as long as our customer has the money to buy them. Okay, now we haven't done the return a ticket yet, but let's compile and run the program, and let's see if we can purchase some seats. Okay, now let's modify the program a little bit. I just ran the program and I noticed that I didn't allow for a uppercase or a lowercase y to be entered as the answer when we read in the answer up here. So in the while loop didn't run because I entered a lowercase y when I should have entered an uppercase y. So let's modify that while loop a little bit. So let's do while the answer is equal to an uppercase y or the answer is equal to a lowercase y. Then we can type in either uppercase or lowercase. The other thing I want to do is I need to add this line of code. I forgot to put that in because when we read in the row in the seat, we have to remember that \n is appended after the seat whenever we hit the enter key. So that's still in the input buffer after I typed in the seat, and that will mess things up later on. So I need to flush out the input buffer by using the cn ignore. So I made those changes to this. So now the program should run correctly. So now let's compile it and run the program. Now let's bring the output window over here. So now we have the seat map. Let's stretch this out a little bit. So here's the seat map to begin with, and we have the question, do you want to buy a ticket, yes or no? And now we can type in a lowercase y or an uppercase y. So let's go back to row 2. We know it's empty. So let's buy seat row 2, seat numbers 1 and 2. So I'll type in a lowercase y this time, and it tells me that there are 73 seats available, and now it shows me the seat map again, so that's nice. Then I can enter row number 2, seat number 1, and I'll hit enter. Good, that seat was available, so I can purchase a seat in seat 1 in row 2. Thank you for your order. And I want to get the next one too, so let's say yes, I want to buy another ticket. And you can tell now that that has been marked with an X. So row 2, seat 1 has been marked as an X. So we have fewer seats to sell, so now you see there's 72 there. So we can pick out row number 2, seat number 2 this time. We'll have 2 tickets together. Then it says, you just purchased seat 2 in row 2. Thank you for your order. So that's working. So we can go through this loop as many times as we want, and we can buy tickets. Now before we leave, let's try to buy a seat that's already occupied. So I notice up here, row 1, seat 1, that has an X in it already. So let's verify that I cannot buy that seat. So I'll say yes, and I'll type in, and up here now we see there's 71 seats because we sold 2. We just bought those 2. So let's try row 1 and seat 1, and it should give us a message that that seat is not available. And that's right, okay? Sorry that seat is taken. Please select a different seat. So then we can move on from there. So that part works. So we're almost done with this. So we can buy seats and we can mark them with X's. Now, we're allowing our customer to return a seat for a refund, in which case we go backwards. We would change the X's back to zeros. So let's finish the program by adding in the code that will make that work. To return a ticket, we just need to get the row and the seat where the ticket is, and then we just need to go mark that seat with a 0 instead of an X. So it's pretty straightforward code. Let's go ahead and paste that code in, and let's go through it. So to begin with, we do need to have the input for the row and the seat. So in the same way that we selected a seat to purchase, we're going to type in the row and the seat of the ticket that we want to return. So we will type that in, and we have to have our CN ignore, and that's got a 10. That would work fine, but I've been using 100, so I'll go back to that. So that just clears out the \n that shows up here when we type in the row and the seat. So this clears it out. And then we just print out to the screen, you just returned a ticket and row that we chose and the seat that we chose. And then we will mark that seat as available. So we want to change the X to an O. Now we have the indices. So we typed in the row, we typed in the seat. So we're counting from 1 upwards, and just because that's what humans do, but we need to reset that to the way that the computer counts. So the row number 1 is actually at index 0. So we subtract the 1, and that allows us to adjust and translate from human form back to computer form. So we subtract 1 off of there, so we'll get the correct index. So we just take the row, we take the seat, and we set that character to 0. And that's the letter O. It's not a 0. I keep saying 0. We want to set that to the letter O. And then, since we did return a seat, we'll just add 1 to the number of seats available. Well, we've now updated the situation, so we want to print out the revised seat map. So we just call our seat map function to do that, and then we're done. We will stay in the loop because there might be other tickets that we want to return, so we have a choice here. If we want to return some more, we just type yes or the letter Y, and we'll go through the loop again. And if we do not have any more, we just type in, and we exit the loop because of the while test up here at the top. Now, that's it. So that's all the code we need in order to return a ticket. Now let's compile the program, and let's verify that we can do that. The program's running now, so I'll bring over the output window, and I've already moved down through the program where I have purchased the seats up here in row number 2, and I'm now ready to return them. So I'm just going to skip past that part because I've demonstrated it already. What we want now is to make sure that we can return the ticket. Okay, do you want to return a ticket, yes or no? So yes, I do want to return the ticket. Now we pick out the row and the seat number, so we know that we purchased row 2, seat number 1 earlier, so we'll select that one. And then it's returned. So now that we can see that row 2, seat number 1 is marked with a 0. So we've successfully returned that ticket. Now, do we want to return another one? Well, okay, if I can't go, then my friend isn't going to go either. All right, so yes, I'm going to return another one. So that would be row 2, seat number 2. Then let's check to see that that's marked, and it is. So now to return the ticket, it's a pretty simple process. We just set the character that's in that location to an X, or to an O, replacing the X that was there. So this now verifies that. And that now is going to be all I'm going to do in this example. Of course, this isn't a real rigorous program. You know, we could pick out any row and any seat that we wanted, even though it might belong to somebody else, and we could return that seat. But we're not going to worry about that in this program. The whole purpose here was to just show you kind of a classical example of what you can do with a two-dimensional array. So that will conclude the program, and it will conclude the video.